Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we explore the hidden stories inside business and financial reports. Today we are diving into the popular high-grade fixed income fund Inc. and its annual shareholder report. Now you might think a fund report is just a bunch of numbers, but what if I told you it can reveal a lot about how money makes its journey and who's managing it? So picture this, a fund aiming for high income while keeping capital safe. Sounds good, right? Let's see how they did over the 12 months ending June 30, 2025. This fund, the popular high-grade fixed income fund Inc. Class A shares, saw a total return of 3.23%. Not bad overall. They say this was mostly thanks to the investments in their bonds and the general rise in value of US bonds, plus the interest rate on those 10-year US Treasury bonds actually went down a little. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The report mentions that the value of some Puerto Rico bonds they held actually dropped. And, all the expenses that come with running a fund, like management fees, also ate into the returns. So even though they did okay, they didn't quite beat their main comparison, which we call a benchmark index. Remember, that index doesn't have any expenses. Digging a little deeper into their performance since they started, we see a picture that's a bit more mixed. If you look at the total return $1,000 investment would have fared. For example, back on May 21, 2024 and 2021, that $10,000 investment was worth exactly $10,000. But roll forward to June 21, that $10,000 investment was worth exactly $10,000. But roll forward to June 25, 2025, and that same investment was worth exactly $10,000. But roll forward to June 25. 2025, and that same investment is now worth $9,000 May 21 $17 if you didn't pay a sales charge, and even less, $8,082 if you did. And when we look at the average annual return since the fund began, it's actually been negative. The Class A shares without sales charges show a return of minus 222% per year on average since May 21, 2000 index. The Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index has seen a slight negative return of minus 0.55% annually. This means over the long haul, this fund hasn't been the best place for your money. Let's look at some key numbers for the fund as of June 30, 2025. They manage total net assets of about $40.4 million. That's the total value of the fund after all its debts are paid. The report 42 different investments in their portfolio and the rate at which they bought and sold these investments. The portfolio turnover rate was 8%. That's relatively low, suggesting they aren't actively trading a lot. The fees paid to the people managing the money, the advisory fees, were around $287,000 for this past year. Now, when you invest in a fund like this, you want to know where your money is actually going. The report breaks down the top 10 holdings. A significant chunk of the fund is invested in Puerto Rico-related bonds. For instance, Puerto Rico Sales Tax Financing Corp. Sales tax revenue bonds due in 2058 made up 8.03% of the fund. Then there's the Federal Farm Credit Banks Funding Corp. Due in 2028 at 7.19%, and Puerto Rico Housing Finance Authority bonds due in 2028 at 7.18%, and Puerto Rico Fannie Mae bonds, which are mortgage-backed securities guaranteed by the Federal National Mortgage Association, making up a whopping 45.98% of their investments. And when we look at how long these investments are held, the maturity weightings tell a story. A huge 70.9% of their investments have maturities of over 10 years. This means that a big portion of their money is tied up in long-term investments. Let's dive into the schedule of investments for a closer look. We see they hold various municipal bonds like California, Georgia, and Maryland bonds. For example, there's a $355,000 investment in Northern California Power Agency revenue bonds due in 2035, valued at $362,000. They also have a large chunk, $1.6 million, in Development Authority of Gwinnett County revenue bonds due in 2046. A large portion of their holdings are in Puerto Rico government instrumentalities, tax-exempt notes. They have several bonds related to the Puerto Rico Sales Tax Financing Corp. Some of these are zero coupon bonds, meaning they don't pay interest regularly, but you buy them at a discount and the income is recognized as that discount increases over time. Then we see their Puerto Rico GNMA bonds, which represent mortgage-backed securities guaranteed by the Government National Mortgage Association. These are subject to principal pay downs faster or slower than expected, which can affect their average lifespan. And a very significant portion, as noted earlier, is in Puerto Rico Fannie Mae bonds, similar to the GNMA bonds but guaranteed by the Federal National Mortgage Association. These also have the potential for their average life to be much shorter than the original maturity date. They also hold some corporate bonds, including Microsoft Corporation bonds. They have a few different maturity dates for Microsoft, like an 8th August 2036 bond with a 3.45% interest rate. And finally, investments in US government-sponsored entities such as the Federal Farm Credit Bank's Funding Corp. Looking at the statement of assets and liabilities, we see the fund has total assets of about $56.9 million. On the liability side, they have about $15 million in payable for reverse repurchase agreements. These are basically short-term loans where the fund sells securities and agrees to buy them back later. In the statement of operations for the year ended June 30, 2025, the fund earned $3.05 million in interest, but their expenses, including investment advisor fees, distribution fees, and interest on those reverse repurchase agreements, added up to about $2.05 million. After everything, they had a net investment income of about $1 million. They also had a net realized and unrealized gain on investment income of about $4 million. They also had a net realized and unrealized gain on investment income of about $467,000, leading to a net increase in net assets from operations of about $1 million. They also had a net realized and unrealized gain on investments of about $447 million and interest on those about $447 million. When we look at the statements of changes in net assets, we can see how the fund's value has changed over time. For the year ending June 30, 2025, the net increase from operations was about $1.47 million. However, they paid out about $1.04 million in dividends to shareholders, and importantly, shares redeemed by investors were $6.86 million. This outflow from investors caused a net decrease in the fund's assets for the year. The statement of cash flows gives us a clearer picture of the money moving in and out. Operating activities brought in about $11.3 million. But the financing activities show a significant outflow. They received cash from reverse repurchase agreements, but the repayments and share redemptions resulted in a net cash used in financing activities of over $11.3 million. Now, for the financial highlights, which really summarize the per share performance. For the year ended June 30, 2025, the net asset value per share ended at $4.85, up from $4.81 at the start of the year. The total return for that year was 3.23%. However, looking back further, the total return since inception has been negative. The numbers show a really mixed performance over the years, with some periods showing losses. The notes to financial statements provide critical details. For instance, Note 1 explains their accounting policies. They value investments at fair value, which is determined by their administrator and investment advisor. Notably, the fund is exempt from Puerto Rico income tax if it distributes at least 90% of its taxable net income. Under other information, we learn about the shareholder meeting on October 24, 2024. Shareholders elected directors and ratified Ernst & Young LL as their independent auditors. It's good to see that the auditor selection seems to be a clear process. The fund also makes its proxy voting policies and procedures available, which is a good sign of transparency. This tells us how they vote on behalf of the companies their fund invests in. In item 8, we see a change in their accounting firms. PricewaterhouseCoopers LLC, or PwC, was dismissed as their auditor in May 2023, and Ernst & Young LLT, or I, took over. The report states there were no disagreements with PwC, and I was consulted prior to their appointment. Finally, item 11 discusses the basis for approving the investment advisory contract. The board of directors reviewed the investment advisor's performance, fees, and overall quality of services. They concluded that the terms were fair and reasonable, considering the market and the services provided. Alright, let's put on our Warren Buffett hat and look at the bigger picture here. Popular High Grade Fixed Income Fund, Inc. seems to be focusing on Puerto Rico-related bonds, which makes up a huge portion of their portfolio. This concentration, especially in Puerto Rico, while the fund is managed by professionals who seem to be transparent about their operations, the significant risk factor. While they aim for high income and capital preservation, their long-term inception returns show they haven't quite hit that mark yet. with negative average annual returns since their start. The fund's performance in the last year was positive but lagged its benchmark, and investor redemptions were quite high. This suggests that investors might be pulling money out, possibly due to the mixed long-term performance or concerns about the concentration in Puerto Rico. While the fund is managed by professionals who seem to be transparent about their operations, the significant exposure to Puerto Rico bonds and the historical underperformance are definitely points to consider if you're thinking about investing. That's our look at the popular high-grade Fixed Income Fund Inc.'s annual report. What's your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord community linked in the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.